apologize being old. And I thought about it, and I thought, no, I'm very glad that I'm old. I hope you get as old as I am. Maybe in a little bit better shape, but I'm no spring chicken. And even an old, well, whatever. But anyway. I've looked forward to this since Richard called and asked me, would it be possible for me to possibly come and speak to the church in the absence of Brother Matt and then others who've fallen ill. And I thought for a while, and I thought, yes, I really, really want to. And that's why I'm here this morning, is because I want to be here. I want to read one verse of Scripture to you this morning and then address myself to some other issues. Paul wrote from a prison cell where he evidently was chained between two soldiers, because if one of the soldiers allowed a prisoner to escape, then his life was taken from him. So Paul was in prison and wrote what we call 4 of the letters. One of them was to the Philippians, and considering where Paul was when he wrote these words, they really had tremendous meaning to me. Paul said, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." And you'll notice that Paul said that whatever state I'm in, that's not Arkansas or Florida, but it means estate, as in a very wealthy setting. So he's not talking about being in prison. He's talking about when I was at another point in my life. And he said, I learned. So contentment is not a gift from God. It's something that we must learn. And I can tell you that Betty and I have contentment. And in the 4 years since I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and then one word added to it, mania, which was an indication that I might harm myself or harm someone else. I want you to know these things because they'll help you understand why I can be content. In the 4 years since I was in the psychological assessment center in the hospital, and I had this full diagnosis that Dr. Beard had noticed early when I had a shrinkage in my left lobe, frontal lobe, and then in my right frontal lobe. That's when they said I had Alzheimer's. But the mania, I don't recall the things that I did to cause my family to do what they did. But I want you to know this, that they are a wonderful family. And they did everything for me that needed to be done. Betty had to sell all of our property. We had to give away our furniture. We had to move into independent living. And she moved in the apartment complex so she could be with me. And then I moved through another process from being locked in, just like being in jail, because they didn't know what I'd do, break loose and run, hurt myself. I didn't try any of that stuff, but it was there on my record and they had to go by it. I moved then to assisted living, and finally the doctor who had given me my medications and said, "You don't belong here." Said, I want you to go where your wife is. So I was released for that. So I want you to know that in this time of 4 years, I did more than I did perhaps in my entire whole ministry. And that was in confinement. We couldn't go anywhere much, and I couldn't do anything much, and so I started writing. And I've written 4 books that have now been published and are well known all over the world in just a short period of time. I'm not bragging. I just want you to know that being in some difficult circumstances don't mean it's the end of your life. And having been designated as Alzheimer and mania, you wouldn't expect me to write something like I just finished the book, and that is the theocentric physicalism. And that just simply means God-centered, and it's a real title. I mean, I didn't make it up. A real title that connects all of the creation to God. And I'm so thankful I could do that, and I hope you'll get to read it sometime. I can't publish them in books anymore. It's too expensive, but it'll be on the internet. Patience and contentment. I want you to know I was born January the 19th, 1935. Of course, this is 2021, so you can figure that out if you want to. The Great Depression was 1935 when it hit the worst, and that's when I was born. But it lasted until World War II. We lost everything. My grandfathers on both sides of my family, my grandfather Goodwin, great-grandfather Penn, they all lost everything. And we were reduced to living in just whatever shambles and shacks we could find and sharecrop. And it was a great blow to our family. We've been prominent families in Lawrence County for years, but we weren't anymore. They didn't take away our pride nor our religion, because we were very active in Baptist churches. It was a time of great difficulty. And then, of course, World War I came. I wasn't alive at that time, but I pastored men who had fought in World War I. In fact, I pastored a man who'd fought in the Spanish-American War of 1918 or 1898, just 2 years before the 19th century. I preached his funeral. He was 100-something years old. So my life has been, strangely enough, geared up to and a part of war more than anything else. I knew men and had neighbors who fought in the Spanish-American War, in World War I, then in World War II. My oldest brother, Stan, was an airline mechanic on the Flying Fortresses. So we didn't know where he was, because they were the ones that bombed Germany and other places for the first time. We know that was happening, but we didn't know where he was. My brother Bill was in the Battle of the Bulge, Patton's Third Army. We didn't know where he was. Patience, faith. And I learned these from my mother and my dad. And then the Korean War came. And above everything else, I wanted to be a soldier like my brothers. So I volunteered for the Korean War. When I talked to the recruiting agent, he asked me if I had any problems. I said, no, I'm very healthy. Oh, I do have a false right eye. He broke his pencil, gave me a curse, and ran me out of the shop. That was my experience. Broke my heart. Vietnam, I was in school, college. People came to college to get out of the war. I didn't like them. But I tolerated them and gave them a lot of advice. And during all of the Middle Eastern wars, the political turmoil, that's just been a real problem for all of us. I surrendered to preach when I was 19 years old, and I'm glad I'm pastor emeritus, which simply means with respect, and I feel that, and I have it shown to me, and I thank you for that. Now I'll read some more from the book of Philippians. Paul said, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity." And that simply means that we wanted to send you an offering while you were in prison, Paul, but we couldn't because the world was such a turmoil, we just couldn't get there. And Paul said, "I realize that you couldn't get here, and I appreciate your effort, but now I'm glad you're here." The reason it was important for them to have someone there have money, literally in prison, it's like it is today. You can buy favors. And Paul could buy extra food and get extra favors from the guards while he was in prison. So it meant something to have them bring him this expression of their love. "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I'm instructed, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need." And this final statement, and I hope you'll get this in your heart and in your mind, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. So it's not my strength and my endurance that allowed me to go to all the places I've been, to the Middle East, India, and we had 15 missionaries at one time that were sent out by this church. I went to India 4 times. God protected me and gave us great blessings. Betty went with me once. And then I studied church history, and I wanted to be a better church history teacher, so I got to go to Europe twice and to study the history of the ancient Waldenses and Albigenses. Been a great blessing to me. But none of those things did much more than to equip me to do what I did in the last 4 years. And that's rather unusual. As I said, I've learned to trust providence. Providence means more to me than any other thing that I can mention to you. The providence of God. It's in one of the Romans chapters, along with foreknowledge. Providence. That is, things can happen and you can be at a certain place at a certain time when it was right for you to be there. I think that providence led us to this property. We wanted to buy it, but it wasn't for sale. The person who was representing an older couple that lived here just said, "Well, no, they won't sell it. They're going to live there till they die." And I didn't say I hope they die. I'm not that capitalistic, I suppose would be a good word. But he called me some 3 or 4 weeks later and said, "This man's been in the hospital for 2 weeks now, and he's going to be here for a while, but he's going to have to go live with his daughter and son-in-law in, I believe, Cabot or Jacksonville." And he said, "I think they'll sell." And I said, "Well, let's buy it." And we gave more than it was worth. You know why? Because he said they want enough money to build a house where they can live. And I said, "How much money do they live?" And they told me. And that's what we gave for this property pretty well, was enough money for them to build a house. You know, you never are punished for doing what's right. So many things are right that we don't think we can afford to do. But if it's right, you can afford to do it. I've always said you can't outgive God. And I think also that you can't outgive God's people. I know how much you've cared for Betty and me. We live where we live and live well because of the retirement and other things that you do for us. How grateful we are. The word state, Paul said, as I mentioned, means elegant or graceful. In politics, influential. Paul was very important to politics. He said, I've been there, folk, and I'm content. That is sufficient to oneself, needing no assistance. Have you heard of autonomous? That's what this word comes. Paul said, I'm autonomous. I don't have to have you because God's going to take care of me. But he said, I'm grateful for that. He said, I've been abased, that is, brought to a very humble position. Paul was a nobility, both as a Jew and as a Gentile. As a Jew, he was a Jew of the Jews, of the tribes that were successful. And he was well educated. He was a tent maker so that he could be respected as a person with a trade. And he was also respected and beloved by the Gentiles. Can you imagine what it was like for a Jew who'd been taught all of his life that we're a chosen race, we have nothing to do with the dog Gentiles? He had been taught such prejudice that none of us can ever even imagine it. Even we who lived in the age of prejudice with Jews and blacks and others. And the Cherokee Indians. That's part of my blood system, and they were run off from Georgia where they owned everything and sent to Oklahoma where they were so poor they could hardly live until they found oil, and then they become rich. God knows how to pay you back, doesn't he? Said, I know how to abound in material benefits. I'm instructed. Paul was instructed by suffering, by any way, by any time, by any ordeal, for he said, in all things. You know, everything ought to be a lesson to us. I know what you think about that fool behind you and fool in back of you when you're driving down the freeway. But you might learn something if you'll just stop and pay attention to maybe there's a reason that people... I still have my driver's license, but I don't drive, folk. And they all say amen to that. Strengthened to make strong. Paul was made strong because he had lived for Christ. Thus Jesus had made him strong. I want to leave this word with you this morning. Now you say, well, you didn't preach very long. I don't want to preach very long. I got a lot to say, and like they said about a certain movie one time, a long way to go and a short time to get there. I'd rather you remember I preached a little while rather than remember that I preached a long time. Here's what Paul said to the church at Thessalonica in his first epistle. And we beseech you, brethren, which is a word that we could say, I beg you. I beg you, brethren, to know them which labor among you. That is, identify the people who are servants of this church. And there are many areas in which many people serve. Your pastors, Brother Matt's pastored, I believe, 10 years now. Is that correct? Well, I pastored this church 44 years. That's 54 years. Brother Duncan organized it, which makes 2 years. And this time, you've had 2 pastors. Doesn't that speak well of you? How many churches do you know of that are of this age that has accomplished as much as you have, and you've just had 2 pastors? Usually 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and you're done. But I believe that pastorates are like a marriage. They ought to last a long time. Get to know them. That's what Paul said. Get to know the people that labor among you, that is, who are working here every Sunday, every day of the week on your behalf. And are over you in the Lord. And he mentions in the Lord. That is, these positions that's been created by the Lord. Primarily the deacon and the pastors. I'm glad you have an associate pastor. You should have. I'm glad you've got 12 deacons. Someone once said, we couldn't have more than 7. That'd be unscriptural. And I said, I have as many as I need. I'm not tied to a number. I'm glad you've got 12. And I'm glad you see after Betty and me. Brother Doyle Oden called me the other night and said, you watching the game? And I said, yes, I am. He said, I am too. How you doing? I said, I'm doing fine, Doyle. And he said, me too. See you. And I said, okay. That's looking after you. If I'd have said I need something, he'd drop what he was doing and come and help me. And I believe they're the deacons of this church. I commend the deacons of this church. I commend the pastors of this church. The janitors, everybody that works here. I commend you for what you do. Paul said, get to know these people and to admonish you and to esteem them very highly in love. Love your treasurer. He's easy to get along with. He won't tell you what he thinks. You have to drag it out of him. But love your church clerk. Miss Phyllis is here. She's been here as long as I have. They've been part of this congregation. It sounded like the Wilsons when we bought this property, moved from Little Rock here. And Miss Geneva, one of the finest Christian women we've ever had. She's just a good Christian woman. And to esteem them, it means to hold them in high honor for the work they do. And I love this next very short sentence that Paul wrote. And be at peace among yourselves. Isn't it good to sit here in peace? Not in a quarrelsome, mean, judgmental attitude about who sits where, or who does what, or who's wearing what, or who don't wear what. We've never been that way. We don't even want to know what your past was. I'm not going to tell you all my past. Some preachers do, I'm not. My mother turned me back to Jesus. I was in Florida, Miami, Florida. Fun town. Beaches on all around. Nothing to do but just go, stay all day. Didn't have any parenting problem. My brother Stan was the oldest brother. We did. And I didn't go to church. My mother and dad came down to Florida to stay a couple of weeks. Stan was still an airline mechanic. He could get free passes for them, so they flew down. The time they were there, my mother and I were washing dishes. She was washing and I was drying. And she said, John, do you go to church? And I said, well, I've been thinking about it. And that was I guess I did think about it. Maybe it wasn't just a bald-faced lie, as we used to say. But I'm 17-year-old, folk. I graduated high school when I was 17-year-old. I hadn't been in a big town. This is my first experience. I had a lot to see and a lot to do. She said, well, the reason that we wanted you to come and help Stan and Sis is because we don't know whether Stan's saved or not. We wanted you to be down here, hope to get him in church. Man, I felt like crawling under the floor. It broke my heart. So after Mother and Dad left, I started going to church. Stan got on to me and said, John, we're going to go out on Tamiami Trail, drive around today. You want to go? And I said, Stan, I can't go. I want to go to church. One Monday morning, we were eating breakfast, and he said, man, I wish you'd get over this church business. He said, we used to be buddies and went everywhere, did everything together. And he said, you've just broken up our friendship and gone off. And I said, Stan, I'm sorry, but I need to go to church. A few weeks later, I came in and we were eating breakfast that Monday morning, and he said, John, are you going to come see me and see us baptized? I like to fall off. I mean, I didn't even know they'd wait till I left, then they'd sneak off and go to church. When he was 37-year-old, he surrendered to preach. Died a very faithful man of God. You'll never know what will turn you around sometimes, but your faithfulness will do more than anything you can do. Just stay with it and be who you are wherever you can be. I don't mean life will be perfect for you, but I can tell you that I'm happy where I am. And this virus that hit, Betty and I sat there in a little apartment for weeks and weeks at a time. And we never had a quarrel, never fought around anything, I didn't complain about food. I don't cook, so I don't complain. You know, if you complain, that means you need to start cooking. And I don't want to cook, so I just don't complain. Well, isn't that good sense? You say, I don't like this food, I'm going to start cooking. Well, good, go ahead. I'm sure your wife won't mind too terribly much if you do that. You kids, you don't like what's set before you, do like my mother and dad did, said, well, get up and go play. I mean, they never apologized for not having what I wanted to eat. I got up sometimes and left, but it wasn't long till I was back asking Mom, could I have what I left? I was easy to get over my pouting. Pouting, it's really a good practice, but it's not worth anything. It hurts you more than the person that you're pouting about. I don't know whether you found that out or not. I'm a practical person. I live like life practical way. Life's good. Live it practically, live it well, live it in faith, and may God bless you. Richard. No, I'll just sit here.